Hurricane cockpit build. Once it's out of the box, 4 cuts are needed to remove a large block of foam here. One straight down the edge of the cockpit here and on the other side. The third one straight across here, cutting downwards along the line here where the cockpit flat edge meets the sloping cockpit panel foam. So that's the cut point across there. The next and fourth cut is along this line here, cutting inwards from the inside of the cockpit forwards. Those 4 cuts will then allow you to remove this block of foam, leaving a nice rectangular cockpit with a panel location here, approximately where it should be. Next task is to cut off the ridge of foam sticking up here. If you cut it flat with the cockpit right the way across, you should see it no longer sticks up. That needs to be removed because it sticks up and blocks part of the pilot's view. We need to remove it and it will look like that. To make this bottom cut here, the one that goes in that way, it's quite difficult to get that nice and flat with a hobby knife. So I did it by going in from here. What you can see as a black line has been marked with a thin pen at 6 mils down from the edge of the cockpit there on both sides. That's a 6 mil drop. Drew a black line, and then by cutting straight through nice and horizontally, it actually comes out exactly at floor level in here, which makes the cut much easier to make. Next step is to cut the hole in the foam to accommodate the servo for panning. That's here. It's 12mm across by 23mm long, and the cut needs to be made 20mm in from each side of the cockpit edge. So it's 20mm in from each side, it's 23mm long, and it's 12mm across. The start of the cut for the servo is 27mm between the edge of the servo and the line of the original foam block here. 27mm from there to start the cut. Okay, now you need to widen the cockpit to allow the servo robot to fit in. So what you need to do is go to the outer edge of what was the flat platform and cut along that outer edge here, right to the back, and cut vertically straight down until it meets this piece of foam here in terms of depth. You need to do that on both sides, and what you'll end up with is a cockpit coaming that has a nice sharp edge on it here where the curve just stops. Originally there was a flat edge a moment ago. That's now gone, as you see. It's a difficult cut to make, but it's even harder to make this cut here, going in that way and in that way, in order to remove it. Obviously you'll need to make a further incision down here and down here to lift the pieces out. This is a difficult cut. You'll need different lengths of hobby blade to do that. I used those different sizes. Obviously you need to be careful not to cut your fingers. If you can put some cut proof gloves on, that would be great, but just be really careful. What you've then got is a fully widened out cockpit. This area here wants to be painted in cockpit green, which is Tamiya XF71 cockpit green, which we're going to use for the inside of the cockpit. Next we need to clean up those rough cut sides by inserting the side panels. There's a left and a right marked on the back. The shiny side gets glue on it, and then you'd fit that in here like that. They should fit, depending how well you made this bottom cut here and how flat you've managed to get it. You might find that it stands up slightly proud. If it does, before you glue it in, just trim off a small amount along the bottom with your hobby knife and keep checking till you've got it absolutely flush. If you get the cut perfect at the bottom, it will fit. If not, you may need to do a little bit of adjusting. I've had to on this test one. Both of mine, once glued in, left a very small white ridge showing like this, which means this cockpit is not absolutely the same size as the others, or the template was very slightly off. Just needs a very sharp hobby knife to cool that down to this flat edge here on the cockpit. Here's one I made earlier, as I say, on Blue Peter, and you'll see that there's a nice flush, if I can get the focus right, it's a nice flush edge there, nice and straight. At this point, paint the whole of this area here dark green, and this area here. While the bottom paintwork on the cockpit's drying, use U-Pour to glue a panel onto a sheet of balsa. Let it dry, and once it's dried on, using a hobby knife, cut round the panel and through the balsa until you've got one that looks like that. What you'll then need to do is this surface here will need to be painted cockpit green. It's the only bit of paintwork you need to put on here. None of the other edges will be seen, but as you can see, there is a green bar going across here on the cockpit, and that just needs to fold over onto the top of that bar. Now you can glue the panel in place. It should dry fit nicely into the front of the cockpit. It's exactly the right width. Glue it with U-Pour on this rectangular area here. Don't put any above this corner because that'll become visible and it'll just stay sticky and get a mess. When you've fitted it, the curved edge of the panel should corner out just at the edge of the cockpit, so that the straight cockpit edge also meets at the cockpit coaming here. Next, look for these two pieces. This piece marked left will go in the bottom of the cockpit, right in this corner here, but right up against the bulkhead at the front, and this curved back edge should fit neatly into the bottom of the cockpit down there. You'll need to paint it in cockpit green before you install it. This piece, which also has a straight edge at the front and a slanted edge at the back, also fits into the cockpit right at the top, in between the panel at the front and the rear of the cockpit, and it should glue onto the card just inside the cockpit and act as a new cockpit top edge. The thin piece that's there will take a lot of knocks, and the real one had an edge piece like this as well. Again, before you install it, it'd be better to paint the sides that are going to be visible so that they're green before you put them in. On the other side of the cockpit, you're going to do the same thing with the top coaming, which will go in here like this with some U-Pour, and at the bottom you have a much shorter piece. It's got a front end that butts up against the foam bulkhead. It slides underneath the cockpit panel, butts up against the side wall like that, right down here in the corner down here, right on the bottom. It doesn't go right to the back of the cockpit like the other side, and that's because this curving edge here allows for the panning mechanism to swivel round in the cockpit. If you didn't cut that away, it wouldn't be able to swivel. It would be too tight. It's not going to be visible from the camera, so that's fine. Now remember I told you didn't have to paint any of the edges of the cockpit panel apart from this little top edge here in cockpit green. Well, I lied. You also need to do this top curve here and down the edge here in black, and inside this little v-neck here in black. That just finishes off the bits that are visible. So the side of your cockpit should now look like that. The lower panel in place, painted at the top where it slips underneath the panel and along the side, and the top piece also in place, again painted at the front where it would touch the panel, and do the same on the other side. Next, cut out the panel hood from templates, and on the shiny side paint like that. You need a couple of mils from the cockpit edge in black. This will be the underside of the hood, but that part that you can see in black there can be visible from the camera. If you leave the edges white for gluing, that would be great. Now while the panel hood dries, your cockpit should look like this, with the top and bottom plinths fitted there, and the top and bottom plinths fitted on this side. It's now time to paint the side walls in cockpit green and that rear sloping panel. And the cockpit now looks like this. Dark green base, cockpit green side panels, painted in. May need a couple of touch-ups, second coat, but you can play that by ear. What we're going to do now is put the hood on above the panel. So take the black side, place it down. What we're doing is lining it up so that this corner here runs flush with the cockpit combing here. This corner here runs flush with the cockpit combing there, and approximately 2 millimeters of this edge here will be sticking out proud on this side into the cockpit as a little bit of overlap and shade. The rest of it can then be glued along here, and stuck here. Also put some Yoo-hoo along this edge and this edge. Only as far as the edge of the balsa, the little V-neck and the top of this silver column will be visible, so don't put any glue on top of that little bit there. Okay, and once the hood is on top, paint it in matte black like that. You also need to paint the leading edge, because that will probably still be white if you don't. It looks shiny now, but that's because it's still wet paint. It is matte black. Okay, and once the hood is on top, paint it in matte black like that. You also need to paint the leading edge, because that will probably still be white if you don't. It looks shiny now, but that's because it's still wet paint. It is matte black. Next, take this 45mm length of circular doweling, paint it cockpit green, and then it'll be ready to put in the cockpit. Next thing to do is to take these 2cm strips and insert them here in the cockpit, approximately 1 centimetre from the panel, one on each side, like that. Just paint the cockpit green. Next, take 3 of these short pieces of doweling, and they're going to be used as instruments on the left side of the cockpit here. 1, 2, 3, one behind the other, across approximately that kind of space. It doesn't have to be too exact, because they'll be fairly soft focus anyway. It would be best to paint these matte black on one front and the sides before you glue it in place. It'll be easier than once it's in there. Right, next, cut out this small red plaque with white writing on it. Curl it around the doweling that you painted green earlier, and then glue it on around about here. It should be on the left hand side of this piece of doweling when you look at it on the ground. So about there. Okay, that's what it'll look like when it's stuck on. Just rolled around in that way. Where we're going to put this now is right underneath the panel here. And it'll go in there so that it fits across like that, and it'll be visible with the red label pointing up at the pilot. So you put it in that way. It'll fit just underneath the edge of the panel, in between the two big fat bolter cross members. And there it is in place. That's what you're looking to achieve. And that's it now in place, showing also the 3 instruments on the side of the cockpit. You've also got 2 of these pins for each model. They need to be painted, one black, the other one can be left this brass colour, and they need to be inserted into the side corners of the cockpit, where I'm going to show you now. Black on the left, brass on the right. Right, this shows you where you need to push the pin in. You push it in at 45 degrees, so it's sticking out 45 degrees into the cockpit and sticking up above the little red and white sign by about 1 millimetre. It's actually a push-pull lever. This one's the black one. The brass one will go in on the other side. Bit of U-hoop or to put it in place should be fine. And then they are in place. Next, cut this out, which is a plaque panel. What's installing approximately here. And there it is. Next, pick up one of these small grey circular dowels and cut out one of these circular discs, which is the compass top. Glue that onto the top of one of these, and when you've done that, install it here, right in the middle. Push right back up against the light green dowel and in the centre of the cockpit, and there it is in place. Next, cut out this label and sign which goes on the left hand side of the cockpit coaming, just here, starting at the front and going as far back as it will go. And there it is in place, along with the control units below it, the dowel with the red and white sign, the magnetic compass, the 2 pull toggles, one in each corner, the panel and the panel hood. That really just gives us this side to complete. We already have one placard in place with 2 more small pieces to put in here. Now you need 2 of these and a piece of balsa sheet. What you need to do is glue one piece onto the balsa sheet, let it dry. Now you need to take 2 of these. The 2 together will make up one wallet. First of all, cut one of them out and slice across the top here, like this, like that. This piece is going to be the base, and you're going to build up from that using a piece of balsa. Mark up a piece of balsa like this, using this piece as a template. You need the balsa to fit inside the edging so that it's the same size as the dark rectangle, leaving the buttons outside, looking like this. Okay, so that's what it's meant to look like, except you don't need to cut it. I've included 4 pieces of balsa pre-cut to that size in your kit. So now it looks like this. And finally, from the third one of these that you've got printed, cut out this piece, the flap that goes over the top. Once you've cut it out, try and curl it around one of the small pieces of dowel that I provided you with, like that, and then fit it onto the top to look like this. And there's the finished pouch once you've put the flap back on over the top. Nice 3D version from 3 pieces of print and a single piece of balsa to bring it up to depth. The next thing we'll make is going to be the map holder, which is this device here. First we'll cut it out. I'll show you where the cuts are. Okay, so now it looks like this. It's been cut, and this line from here to here has also been cut, but you probably can't see that. That's to allow for folding. Now I'm going to gently score along all the black lines to allow for folding. I shall fold the opposite direction in each case, just gently, to create the crease. Then I'll reverse that so all these black lines are on the inside. Okay, so you can see I've scored down the lines and folded them very slightly backwards just to create the crease. What we're now going to do is reverse it and reverse all those creases and turn it into a small pouch. Okay, when you fold it up, it's going to look like this. That's still dry folded. Put the short piece around behind, because then you won't see it from the cockpit camera. Bottom folds over, and just inside that little tab there will allow you to glue the bottom closed onto it. So once you're comfortable, you know where you're going to glue it all together, and it's ready to go in the cockpit and be painted green. Once you've finished them, the map case is going to go here, and the small canvas pouch is going to go here. Exactly where is going to be a little bit flexible. Further forward would be better than further back, because they're more likely to be spotted then from the camera. And there they are, fully installed in the cockpit, pretty much where they need to go. Only one thing to go in the cockpit now, and that's the gun sight. Those I haven't made yet, but by the time you get this, there will be gun sights. I've done an inquiry for some 3D printed ones. I have one, which I had of my own already. I'll show you how to make it up so that when you get yours, you can install it. First of all, you can see a hole in the green foam towards the top of that there. It's showing in white there. That is the piercing hole in the foam to install the gun sight. And here's the gun sight as you'll get it. 3D print with a piece of glazing on the top. When you get it, it'll probably have a gun sight on the glass in black. Sticking out the back, there'll be a piece of metal rod, soft metal rod. You need to angle it roughly like that in order to install it into the foam. How much angle you put in, you can adjust that to get it in exactly the right position in the cockpit, so it's nice and vertically upwards and tucked right up close to the dashboard. I would try this several times dry before you actually put any glue on, but eventually when you're ready, you can simply put some Yoo-hoo pour on the unpainted piece and push it into the foam, leave it to dry. And there it is in situ, in true Blue Peter style. Here's one I made earlier. Installed in place, and that is the Hurricane cockpit as far as I'm planning to take it, unless Tim asks us to do some more with it. Other than that, it's just installing the frame over the top. Now to do that, I'm planning to put some basswood inserts along this brown edge at about the point where screws can go through the outer cockpit frame to screw them on. I'm looking to screw them on simply so that if we need to access the camera for repairs, we don't have to keep pulling glue undone. It's possible it might need to be done several times. Okay, I drill 1.5mm holes here, 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 and the same places on the other side. There and there. Placed the canopy on the cockpit, held it down nice and tight, and then drilled through into the foam just to mark where each of the screws would go. I then actually placed a piece of timber with the screw hole right in the centre, cut round it, dug the foam out, super glued the piece of base timber in situ. Now all it needs to do now is replace the cockpit, hold it firmly down so that there are no gaps anywhere, and then drill another 1.5mm hole straight through into the timber to give some purchase for the screws when they go in, to make sure they don't split the timber. These are the screws. They're 2mm posi drive flange screws, 8mm long. I've actually asked for Tim to get a whole load of these ordered up, so there's ample to have 4 or 5 per plane. As soon as I've got them, I'll share them with you. Next step is take one of these balsa blocks, which is in the kit, U-hoop puller on the bottom, and fix it in right at the back across here, so that the servo can clamp onto it. Okay, there it is in place. Before painting it, I've put some drops of thin cyano on this area here and on the front face here, just to toughen the balsa to cope better with the screw being pushed into it. Okay, there it is with the paint on it, dark green paint, same as the base of the cockpit. I actually used this stuff, which is XF81 Tamiya paint, and it's called Dark Green 2 RAF XF81. You could pretty much use any dark green that would be used for the green camo on an RAF plane. It's just to make a dark greeny shadowy base for the cockpit. Okay, that's the Hurricane scale cockpit ready simply to fit the camera unit and camera servos into, and drop the glazed canopy on top once the camera's in. That's it. And that brings us to the most difficult part of all, which is cutting the transparent glazing out of the cockpit canopy so that we can reglaze or leave blank. This is actually done. I've cut out all but the top rear pane, which is essentially invisible to the camera. This needs an incredibly sharp hobby knife and a very, very steady hand. It's extremely easy when cutting this to inadvertently cut right through one of these thin cross beams. You really, really need to cut slowly and carefully. It takes nearly an hour to cut one of these canopies to that standard, and to keep the edges nice and straight. So don't try to rush it. It will only chop something up or put big gouges in it. Once it's at this stage, you can get some cockpit green and paint the inside of all of these struts cockpit green. Careful not to get it onto the glazing of that rear piece, and it's then ready to put glazing in if we need to do so. If we do, I'll have pieces. If we do need glazing, I'll have pieces cut for the windscreen, the 2 side screens, and for these 2 upper screens. At the moment I'm not planning to produce glazing for the other pieces, but I have got templates if Tim wants us to do them.